Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I'd like to acknowledge that we are here on the land of the Briarcalung people of the Gunai Kurnai Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This is our third community webinar from the My Town team, so it's quite very exciting, and we've got a very packed lineup this evening. We've got 3 speakers. As the My Town Community Reference Group looks to transition and evolve, we look to how we should or could build a community energy group. We have a wealth of experience this evening looking at community energy from a national, regional and a more local perspective. I would like to ask that obviously if you have questions or any comments, then please write them in the chat, and you will have plenty of opportunity to ask those questions later on. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Oh, sorry, one other bit of housekeeping. Obviously, if you're not speaking, can you please keep your sound and your camera off as well? Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Kristy Walters. Kristy is a director at the Community Power Agency, the leading organisation for community energy support in Australia. Their mission is to ensure everyday people can participate and benefit in a fair and fast transition to a renewable energy powered future. Kristy is an experienced facilitator with a background in community engagement, environmental campaigning and permaculture education. She brings these skills to her community energy work with enthusiasm to empower volunteers around the country to take the power back into their own hands. Kristy, thank you very much for making the time to talk to us this evening. Are you able to share your screen? I have enabled it.
Yes, yeah, I can do that. I'll just start off by saying it's wonderful to be here. I'm calling in to you from Meanjin, otherwise known as Brisbane, in the lands of the Geyer and Turrbal people. So I'll just share my screen now. Get my PowerPoint up. All right, hopefully folks can see that now. I'm going to assume that's a yes because I can't hear anything else. So I'm here to talk to you all about community energy and the status. I've met a few folks from the My Town project in Hayfield. So hello to Julie and Murray and a few others from the CRG. I hope you're on the line. And I'm looking forward to seeing you a bit later. But I'll get started. So I'm sure lots of folks are aware, but just in case there's anyone on the call that hasn't come across community energy before, it's essentially where a community comes together to develop, deliver, and or benefit from sustainable energy projects. It can include supply side projects such as renewable energy installations and storage, like batteries, demand side projects such as energy efficiency and demand management, community-based approaches to selling or distributing energy as well. Although a little sad story on that front, the first community-owned energy retailer, Anova Energy, recently went into voluntary administration. So it's a sad day for the energy system, I suppose, at this point. So hopefully we'll see more of those sort of things crop up. The idea of community energy is that it's more than just a technology and money coming together. There's a crucial element in the middle, which is people. The idea is to create energy systems, whether it's renewable energy, energy efficiency, whatever kind of project it is, that is appropriate for the local context and involves people in the journey to create the project. And there's lots of different ways that can happen. I'm sure you're familiar with many of these, solar households, community energy groups. Aboriginal communities are increasingly starting these projects. Lots of farmers are installing or participating in community energy projects by hosting renewables. Councils are getting on board, sourcing some of their energy supplies from community energy groups. Fossil fuel workers and communities are figuring out how they can be part of this as well. Clearly businesses is getting on board. That photo is of Pingala's project with Young Henry's at a brewery in Sydney. And obviously vulnerable and locked out people are really interested in how they can participate in these kinds of projects, because they're often left out of large-scale energy. We like to talk about the 4 Ds of community energy. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the first one, to decarbonise by using renewable energy or low carbon technologies, which is obviously lowering our carbon emissions. Decentralising is another crucial one, by having lots more energy production and storage all around our country helps with our energy resilience. And I know that's been an issue in Hayfield some of the time, and many other remote communities. Having a reliable supply of energy can be really important. The third one is to democratise our energy system through community ownership and/or participation. This one is really important to me, because I think a strong community is one where people are involved in the fabric of their own community, and that includes how you get your energy. So whether it's they understand the system, they're involved, maybe a shareholder, or they help to initiate getting solar on local buildings. Like I know that there's solar on the Hayfields Wetland Centre, and hat tip to everyone involved in getting that together. And the fourth one is really crucial to bringing other people on this journey with us, and that's to demonstrate that renewable energy technologies work, and there's lots of ways that they can benefit people. This photo here is from the Lismore Community Solar, which is a floating solar array on their sewage treatment plant. Now, I had this slide in here from other presentations, so I'm not really sure where the project is at the moment, given they've had floods in the area, but it has been a great success. Now, community energy internationally is really much more further advanced than in Australia. For example, in Scotland, there are over 500 community energy projects with more than 600 megawatts of power capacity. And that stat is from at least 5 years ago, so I'm sure it's more than that now. And in Germany, as of 2013, almost half of all renewable energy was owned by its citizens and communities. So we've got a bit of a way to go here. The status of community energy in Australia in 2010, so more than about 10 years ago, a bit over, there was only 3 groups. There wasn't any known operating projects, and there wasn't any support organisations. Now, fast forward to today, there's at least 110 groups operating around Australia with over 150 projects. And I suspect it's a little bit higher than that. We haven't been able to get, I haven't had the time really to update a lot of these figures. And there's 2 support organisations for community energy, Community Power Agency, ourselves, and the Coalition for Community Energy as well. And there are also numerous specialised consultants that have worked with a lot of these community energy projects around the country in lots of different areas. So the other thing to say about the status of community energy is it's increasingly in Australia being recognised as an important part of our transition to renewable energy. There's been several grant programs directly for community energy in Victoria. There's a few in New South Wales over the years. I'm sure a lot of you are aware that there were 7 community power hubs across Victoria, which saw some great success. Unfortunately, they were defunded at the end of June this year. So we're working really hard to try and get further funding for hubs in Victoria and around the country. So hopefully we'll get some traction on that. And then in 2019, there was an independent federal MP, Helen Haynes, in the seat of Indi. She was elected in a regional seat, and it was actually the first time an independent was elected following a different independent MP. And a big part of that was because of her key platform of climate action, which was driven by the proliferation of community-owned renewable energy groups. That's what CORE stands for there. In her electorate, all calling for more climate action and ways that they could help take that climate action themselves. So that happened. And then fast forward to last year, well, I guess it started in 2020, Helen Haynes worked on the local power plan. I think some folks on this call might have contributed to that. We certainly did. And that led to her drafting a bill called the Australian Local Power Agency, which would embed community energy in national legislation. So far, that hasn't gone anywhere beyond the Energy and Environment Committee, but we're hopeful with this new Labor government that there might be some more traction. The other thing to mention that's happened in the intervening years, lots of other groups are recognising ways that they can support community energy. For example, I mentioned earlier the City of Sydney put in their power purchase agreement to buy renewable energy, that they wanted to purchase some of that from a community energy group, and that was Repower Shoalhaven that was successful in that tender. And this year, just in the last couple of months, we've seen that federal Labor got elected with two policies on community energy, the community batteries policy and the solar banks or gardens policy. So they're yet to be rolled out, but it's a good sign of what's to come, I think. So the impact of community energy, now this is a little bit out of date. These figures are from 2014, when Community Power Agency alongside the Coalition for Community Energy conducted a collective impact study of all of the community energy groups in Australia. And we found that they've contributed over 23 million in community funding for energy infrastructure, over 9 megawatts of renewable energy, over 50,000 megawatts hours of clean energy. These projects have avoided over 43,000 tonnes in carbon emissions, and collectively have developed a membership and supporter base of over 21,000 people. And so that's from about 8 years ago. And we're seeking to do this impact study again this year. And we estimate that the figures are going to be at least 5 times the statistics here. So it's really making a huge impact collectively. Similar to how rooftop solar collectively in Australia produces more power than our second largest coal-fired power station. So while a lot of projects are small individually, if there's lots of them happening, they really do have quite an impact across the country. I'll finish up with a bit of a case study. Recently, we helped Repower Mornington Peninsula to form as a community energy group, obviously in the Mornington Peninsula. And this started out from the Mornington Peninsula Shire Council being pushed to take climate action by its residents. And they reached out to us to speak at a webinar they were organising on climate action. And from that webinar, there was a call out to say, we've heard a little bit about community energy, who would be interested in pursuing this further. And they got something like 50 responses back saying, yeah, I want to be involved in some way. And so they were able to source some funding to pay for us to run inception workshops and to write an options paper for the various things that a group could do on community energy in their region. And this Zoom shot is from one of the workshops we did at the end, where everyone was pretty happy. And I guess the way this happened, I'll just kind of briefly go over it, but I'm very happy to answer questions people might have about this. So because it was funded by the council, it was a really defined area, the council LGA of where they wanted to work. Now, council areas are usually quite large, and I would say most often community groups work best when it's just for a particular town, because you're more likely to know everybody that's in the group and know what sort of infrastructure is in your area. And indeed, once the group kind of got going, they did want to be inclusive of the whole council area, but sort of realised, okay, this maybe is just too large an area. Let's sort of take a stage process and focus on this sort of town area, and then we'll move on to the next town area. And so they've kind of developed into various subgroups. The council staff invited a bunch of relevant stakeholders to participate, and then word of mouth kind of got around, and and other folks came along as well, and they established as a not-for-profit association, and they did that so that they could get funding from council, which I'm pretty sure is what they accessed in order to build this snazzy website, which is the screenshot at the bottom there. You can look up Repower Mornington Peninsula if you want to see what they're doing there. And they've got a bunch of ways that people can participate in their group, or things that they can do locally at their home as a sort of first step into involving people. But I think they've got some big plans in the area down there. So I might leave it there. I'm keen to hear what other folks have, and I know we've got some other speakers here that are speaking from community energy groups, so keen to make sure there's lots of time for questions at the end. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Kristy. So no one's put any questions into the chat. If anybody's got a question that they'd like to ask, can you raise your hand, and then we'll take you off mute. So just so we don't end up with lots and lots of feedback and everybody taking, obviously coming off mute all at once. Has anyone got anything they'd like to ask Kristy? Okay, you can ask your question later on. I was interested looking at the website from Repower Mornington Peninsula. They've got the My Town at the top there. So are those subgroups that or those areas that they've developed, Kristy?
Yeah. So they would be the region. So you kind of go to that and say, oh, my town is Mount Martha.
All right.
And then figure out, because there's a really cool tool. I forget exactly what it's called, but it tells you what your emissions are for your town.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it breaks it up. So they're using that tool.
Okay. I think we might have to go and register our name. Question here from Tim McCoy, who some of you may know as from What Watches, on a project lead on My Town Microgrid. Kristy, how are community power projects responding to the state of the energy market and the pressure on community retailers at the moment? That's a very good question, obviously, in light of Enova's move into administration. Yeah,
well, so Enova is the first and I guess only truly kind of community owned and run retailer. Some of the other community retailers like Indigo Power and Co-Power, they do definitely have a lot of community participation and direct their profits locally. However, it's called white labeling. So they use a bigger retailer to source their power rather than going out to the market, as it were, themselves. So they're backed by energy locals, which I think has helped them to weather the energy market storm a little bit better, because it's a much bigger retail than Enova was, and they've obviously been in the game for quite a bit longer. So I think have maybe experienced similar things. But I know that there were a couple of other community energy groups that were looking to set up their own community retailer, and I suspect that they're just putting pause on that for the moment and potentially trying some other projects first.
Yeah, very unsettling times, obviously. Okay, well, Kristy, thank you very much for that. Your presentation was great, and obviously at the end of after our webinars, they are recorded, and we share presentations through our website as well. So anybody wanting to have a look at that will be able to do so. So thank you very much. All right, we will move on to our next speaker. Right. So for those of you who are local, Darren McCubbin will be very familiar to you. For those of you who are coming in from outside of Gippsland, I'll introduce him. Darren McCubbin comes from a background working at the Bureau of Meteorology after studying fluid dynamics. I had no idea, Darren. Following 17 years in local government and a lifetime of environmental activism, he is honoured to be the CEO of the Gippsland Climate Change Network, whose mission is to work with governments, industry and the community for environmental outcomes within Gippsland. Darren, thank you very much for coming and speaking with us tonight.
And thank you very much.
We know you're a very busy man. So, yes, we look forward to hearing your perspective on community energy in the Gippsland region.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you very much for the Mytone hosting. I'm a real fan of what you guys are doing. It's wonderful that local communities like Hayfield can get together and really research a problem like this. And look, kudos to all of you. It's been hard work, but it's really been worth it from the point of view. And thank you to Kristy as well for that presentation. I feel a bit awed now. Anyway, I'm going to try to get mine going. Let's get started. Hopefully I can start this. Whoopsie daisy, I might just get out of that, get back. So hopefully you can see that. Is that being shared?
Yep, all good.
Good work. I'm talking to you about the Gippsland Climate Change Network. The Gippsland Climate Change Network has been around since 2005. We started off as a greenhouse alliance and were funded by DELP to provide a greenhouse alliance like many others around Victoria. Greenhouse alliances are mainly amalgams of local governments. They do work within their particular regions of local government. We were very different in that we were a community organisation first, which had this link to the Greenhouse Alliance Network. We were originally funded by DELP, but that funding was removed about 10 years ago, and we haven't had funding from them ever since. We have a community committee that governs what we do, 15 people who are on our board, which is maybe a little bit big, but there are all sorts of people from Latrobe Valley Power workers to activists to workers within local government to members of sustainability groups themselves, because at the end of the day, the Gippsland Climate Change Network is a network of other organisations, and we provide support and assistance to those. These days we have a staff, so myself, you might know Esther, who works through the LVA, and also we've got Sharon, who's our communications officer. So we've got a number of staff members who we're able to employ, most of them working just part-time. These days we're funded through projects. We do a number of projects. We also have membership and two LGA members, Latrobe and Wellington as well. So that's how we obtain our funding. So looking at the projects that we do, for which we're known for, the first one, of course, is a community power hub in Gippsland, which followed on from the Latrobe Valley Community Power Hub. Lily here announcing the opening of that in August. What the idea of the Power Hub was to provide technical advice and funding suggestions and support for community energy projects throughout Gippsland. We are part of an amalgam with Mallacoota Sustainability Group and the Energy Innovation Co-op. So we formed a governance group that GCCM was the host organisation, was the lead of that, but the other three we form in partnership with, and we do a number of things throughout Gippsland in supporting community energy projects. We've done 8 independent projects, community energy projects around Gippsland at various places, and supported a number of others. We've got about 30 or 40 projects on the books that we're working through, helping, trying to obtain funding for, just being someone to talk to about technical advice, just being a shoulder to lean on, I guess. So moving on to some other projects. So the idea of it is, of the Gippsland Community Power Hub, is that we walk through people through community energy projects. Now, that it was funded until June of this year. It wasn't given recurrent funding, but we're going to keep the project going. So we're going to keep maintaining it with some extra money that I've found to be able to support a couple of officers to be able to continue to provide support and continue to work in the community. We think it's this important, and I think you just heard from Kristy about why it's important, and we think we want to continue to support projects around Gippsland. So that's what we're intending to do. I'm not entirely sure to know how we're going to fund it, but anyway, we'll worry about that down the track, eh? One of the other things we do is the Energised Gippsland Renewable Fund. This is a fund that we have been able to establish, which provides no deposit finance for not-for-profit community groups to provide solar installations on their roof. So a lot of the problem with community groups is they can't afford the initial price of the solar, but if you lend them the money, they don't have to pay anything for it, and then they pay it back over a 3 or 5 year period, generally at under what the savings that they get for that particular installation. So you're looking at the organic grocery store in Warragul, the the Warragul Food Hub. That was one we funded. We also funded the Earth Worker in Morwell and a number of other projects in Neerim South Community Nearham Community Health and so on. So that's another thing that we've been rolling out. We've got about 7 or 8 projects that we're doing in the Energised Gippsland Renewable Fund. We did the Small Business Energy Savers, so we got the project to run that, and so we were able to go into businesses and do energy efficiency products. We engaged about 430 people and provided about 120 installs, including this one in Sale, where they were able to get themselves a nice, shiny, new energy efficient display case for practically nothing. So that was very, very good. We're also doing some EV car chargers. So we're partnering with AGL and we're rolling out 10 EV chargers around Gippsland, of which we're going to obtain the benefit for that, plus also encouraging people to use electric vehicles. We're doing 2 larger scale projects, which we got funding for. One, a floating solar project at Lardner Park in Gippsland. We're a real fan of floating solar, and we want to do some investigation into that. And we're going to do that on the dam at Lardner Park. Not a huge area of the dam, about 2% of the dam, but a 50 kilowatt system is going to be placed in that. And also working at Yallambee Aged Care. People living in aged care have significant energy stress, and we're doing a 200 kilowatt system on Yallambee Aged Care to provide benefits to the residents and, of course, save the planet at the same time. So we're doing some larger scale projects continuing down the track. Both of these were funded through the Latrobe Valley Energy and Growth Fund. We are involving ourselves a bit in agriculture. We're doing some biocrop trials. We studied a pyroflash unit for the Yarra Mill, but we also planted some sorghum at Gippsland Waterside on Mafra Road, which is currently being tested and pyrolysed, or whatever you call it. And we're really keen on some of the byproducts of that. We think, we're sort of dipping our toe into this area. We were funded through this through the Latrobe Valley Authority, but the idea of using biomass for energy or for biochar, I think, is really exciting, particularly in an agriculture sector like we live in. We're sort of, we continue to push that along a bit too. And of course, the other thing that we're doing right now is the Gippsland New Energy Conference, which is coming on from 11th and 12th. We're really interested in this whole idea of the Gippsland Renewable Energy Zone and looking to involve ourselves in that conversation, and mostly because we think that community needs to be included within that conversation. It's not just about the big proponents working offshore or whatever they're doing. There needs to be community in there as well, ensuring that Gippsland gets benefit from having these renewable things happening within our part of the world, and ensuring that that they can hear from the community as well. So we're running the conference, and there's a number of really interesting speakers, including Zoe at the conference. So the tickets have all sold out. So we put 250 up, and they've already sold out. But it should be really exciting, and there'll be a number of videos and so on available after. We're going to create highlights packages for the conference. So that's another project that we're involved in. So I hope I've given you an idea that the network hopes to encourage community energy around. We do community energy projects ourselves, but probably more importantly, we encourage other smaller towns to get involved in their community energy projects, providing them with access to funding where we can, providing them with support and encouragement and networking opportunities. We're always stronger if we all act together. So that's kind of our philosophy. And we're very fortunate that we're able to do projects which ultimately create benefit as well as maintaining our network into the future. That's about all I have to say, really. So I hope I've given you a bit of a snapshot of GCCN and how it operates. I shall stop sharing, and I'll have a question or two.
Thank you very much, Darren. That's very, very good. So it's great that the conference, it's all sold out, and
yeah, it's fantastic. We had about 20 sponsors for the conference, and then they took on some tickets, and then the community. We also gave away a bunch of tickets. So our idea was to try to have as many community people in the room as possible, which we've been able to do. We've got some people from the Community Power Agency there as well. I'm hoping that Geyer comes down to us. So it should be a pretty exciting time. Yeah, we're really excited that we sold out. It's really good.
Yeah, that's good. Fantastic. Has anyone got any questions for Darren? Either via the chat or if they'd like to take themselves off mute, they can do.
I have one. I'm not sure if it's interesting to everybody else, but and the absence of other questions, it's so great to hear that you are trying to continue the Community Power Hub initiatives. I'm wondering how you're funding that.
Well, we are funding it through our own resources. My gut feeling is that once you stop this thing, I mean, we're not been able to fund it to the same extent. So let's be honest, it's not nearly as good as what it was in the old days. We're not necessarily going to have the reach of the engagement officers we had in the past, although we are going to keep some engagement going. We are doing a lot of more stuff volunteer based, but we do have some paid staff that we're going to place onto the project. It's so hard once you stop everything and everybody goes home to actually kick the thing on again. Yeah. So we're thinking, oh, that's really stupid. So I sort of said, let's roll the dice. Let's start it. Let's keep it going. Because my gut feel is that, and we were the Latrobe Valley. We did the Latrobe Valley pilot project, the initial one. And we were funded for a year and then that stopped. And then they funded us again for a year and then they stopped. And then they funded us again and then it stopped. We've been used to this up and down for the last 3 years. So my feeling is that if it's a good idea, if you provide a good idea, governments ultimately will come along and fund you. And now they're in the process right now of doing an independent research paper onto the power hubs. Valuation, correct. Now, when they did it last time, they discovered that for every dollar that the government spent on the power hub, I think it was $13 or something in return. It was some huge amount of money that they returned back. And that's because they had all these volunteers working, they had all this excitement in the community. It was just like a no-brainer. So when they presented that to the government, they go, oh, that's a pretty good idea. Let's do it. And my gut feel is, again, that that they'll discover that this is a pretty good idea. I mean, I know I am known for my hyperbole, but we are on the cusp of history. We are seeing an enormous transition in the renewable energy market. We're going from, particularly in Gippsland, from our traditional coal-fired power stations to a new set of renewable power. And
there's so much potential, I think, to not only have all of those benefits flowing to the large end of town, correct, but the communities as well. Lots of communities involved and diversity of ideas that brings.
Absolutely, and I tell you, and I'm sorry to keep talking out the top of you, but I'm getting excited now. And if they don't provide those sorts of benefits, the Gippsland community are going to get really upset with them. So if you want to start building infrastructure through your area, or you want to build things offshore, or you want to do this and do that, people in Gippsland are quite rightly going to ask them, well, where's the jobs? Where's the jobs? What's the benefit in it for me? What am I actually going to get out of all this? And part of that, I think, is more security for the network. Part of that is going to be about community energy so that you get benefits flowing onto the community. So we are in Gippsland in a real critical time of our evolution. I think it's generational. And so, we're taking a punt. I'm going, you know what? I think they're going to have to involve the community in this change, and we, through the Power Hub, can assist in that, as indeed Hayfield can, and we all can, and so, I'm pretty confident that we can make that argument into the future. And running the conference, running some of these projects is part of me making that argument.
Well, we're going to be campaigning at a federal level to try and get funding to community power hubs in Victoria.
And totally right.
Keep these initiatives going and have them elsewhere as well.
And I appreciate that too, because that's the unknown, the feds. See, so not only have you got the state government, I think has been supportive of the project into the past, but you're absolutely right. You've now got the feds, which they didn't take to this election, the community power hubs, like they did to the previous one. But I still think, again, if they want to get people, involved in this kind of revolution of renewables, you've got to involve people. You've got to be on the ground supporting them through their own projects. And that's what the power hubs and my town and other things are all doing. So my feeling is if you're sitting there, if you've got to, and you've got to deliver, you've got to have a good organisation which has got runs on the board that's going to deal with this thing properly. And if you can do all those things, then I think there's optimism for your future. So we're taking a bit of a risk. We're funding something that we don't have funding for, and we'll just see how she goes.
Yes. So fingers crossed.
Thank you.
That's great, Darren. I mean, isn't it hunger is the mother of all invention? I mean, that isn't community energy in itself is risk based.
Yeah.
It is flying in the face of what everybody else has been doing for the decades. So,
and look, it's about networks too. We're very fortunate, and that local government. And I guess I've got a history there too. So we're going to form a stronger greenhouse alliance. So 4 of the local councils have formed this greenhouse alliance, of which we're coordinating, and we're also with the LVA forming a new energy officer, which we've been able to get funding for, which we're going to advertise in the next few weeks. So we're already, as long as you can establish those networks, you deliver, like you say, you deliver. Then I think there's tremendous opportunities moving forward.
The Greenhouse Alliance, is that, will there be information available on that?
Yeah, sure, there will be. So the idea is there's Greenhouse Alliances all over the place. People might be familiar with SECA, which is Southeastern Councils for Community Action. The new one here in Gippsland is called the Gippsland Alliance for Climate Action. Now, it's essentially a local government. It's made up of Wellington, Latrobe, South Gippsland and East Gippsland, where we're hopeful Borval will join in a bit later on, and that will be looking at how councils collectively can come up with sustainability opportunities. And again, our argument is that local government should be working through things like my town, and to deliver those sustainability outcomes. This doesn't happen because somebody writes a paper. It's about people on the ground actually doing stuff,
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Darren. Obviously, people can ask some more questions after our final speaker. So I'd now like to introduce Zoe Geyer, who is well and truly in the thick of it. Zoe has been the coordinator of Totally Renewable Phillip Island from 2021. By profession, Zoe is an architect and certified passive house designer, and with extensive experience in grassroots advocacy, governance, and community leadership. She works with the Phillip Island and Bass Coast communities alongside Trippy's 6 working groups focusing on clean energy, clean green transport, regenerative carbon farming, food and waste, carbon accounting, and education and communication. That should keep everybody busy, really. Trippy's mission is working together to be 100% renewable and carbon neutral by 2030. There you go. That's the goal. All right. Zoe, thank you very much for taking the time out to come and speak to us this evening. I will put myself on mute and get rid of my camera. And if you'd like to share your screen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Emma. And I'll just get this screen going. Here we go. Okay, hopefully everyone can see some very bright colours.
Yep, all good.
Fantastic. So I do want to say up front that this is kind of exactly what Trippy loves to do, which is just get out and talk to everyone, because we've found that pretty much everything we do and every conversation that we take part in generates about 10 others. So I think these kind of forums are just brilliant. So thank you, Emma, for reaching out, and for Hayfield, for My Town Microgrid, and thanks to the other speakers as well, Darren and Kristy, for being here today. And I'll do a little call out later to a few other people I noticed on the line, but I won't tell you when I'm going to do that. I'll catch you by surprise. So before I go any further, I'd just like to acknowledge the First Nations people of Australia and where we are, where I'm sitting today. It's the Bunurong and our neighbours, the Gunai Kurnai as well. Now, I think it's just critical as we talk about, from Trippy's perspective, a renewable future. It's not just energy, it's actually re-looking at all of the systems in place. And part of that is reconciliation, which is just critical. So what I'm going to talk about today, a little bit of an overview of Trippy's history, so our group's organisation structure, and how we manage relationships with our partners, particularly in reference to one of our big neighbourhood battery initiative projects which is a tariff trial. So it's one of 2 projects we've got underway in clean energy at the moment. So I keep referring to Trippy. Obviously, we're Totally Renewable Phillip Island, but Trippy is just a little bit catchier. So we like to think of ourselves, even though we are a community group, we think of ourselves as a movement or a forum. So we are actually a collection of lots of groups and individuals who are passionate about changing for a positive future. And we completely believe that we are all in it together. So I think as we move forward, we don't want to become these isolated little townships doing our own thing. We really want to be part of this movement of groups and people looking at how we can do things better. We came about from a public forum in June 2018, so pretty recently, and that was organised by the Energy Innovation Cooperative alongside other Phillip Island groups who then became members as well. So at this public forum, a couple of hundred people attended, some virtually. It was unanimously agreed to form Totally Renewable Phillip Island with the vision of zero emissions by 2030. And we were very fortunate from that very early inception that we had the strong support of the Bass Coast Shire. And they actually provided seed funding, 3 years of seed funding to help us get set up and established. So it's interesting that it's exactly now that that 3-year period has come to an end, and we're looking at what we have achieved and where we're going to go from here as well. So this is just a little diagram basically of who our partners are and how we operate. So you can see this top section here. These are all of our member groups and organisations, everything from the Shire, the Phillip Island Nature Parks, Western Port Water, the Conservation Society, and so on. And here in this lower section, we've got all of our working groups. So here, this bright red one is energy or clean energy. And as Emma read out in that introduction, we've also got clean green transport, education, communication, food and waste, carbon farming. We are now shifting more to a focus on regenerative farming and carbon accounting as well. We've also done quite a few videos and hosted sessions. We've got a beautiful one with Heather Smith, who's on this call, up on our YouTube Trippy channel, and quite a few other things as well. So feel free to Google Totally Renewable Phillip Island if you want to watch some quite long and unedited, but very informative sessions. So just as a little bit of context, and I think this is important when we talk about partnerships and how we can feed off each other. So Trippy sort of came about in 2018 out of that public forum, and in 2019, the Shire declared a climate emergency. So we like to think that the community standing up and saying this is what we believe in actually gave council, our local government, the strength to be able to go ahead and make that declaration. That then led to the preparation and then the adoption of the Climate Change Action Plan just last year, late last year, which also had a net zero emissions target of 2030. And I again like to just say, this is the same target as Trippy. So it's a declaration plus a target. So again, it's that interlinked nature of local government at that grassroots level with community that we've been able to empower each other. This is just a snapshot I've grabbed out of the Bass Coast Climate Change Action Plan, where they've mapped all of the emissions through the Bass Coast Shire. This is based on 2019-2020. They've done this in a few ways. They've done it by economic sectors here, which I'll zoom in a little bit if anyone's interested. There's, for instance, this magenta colour is stationary energy, transport energy, waste and wastewater, industrial processes, agriculture, and let me see if I can spot any land use change. Well, obviously that's the positive, so it's not on there. But it's quite interesting when I mentioned that we have a working group, carbon accounting. This is the kind of activity that we do. We don't necessarily work from scratch. We work with what's out there and the information that council's looking into as well. And we utilise that information to help with our education, with our project development and understanding where we can have the most impact. And this is that same information mapped a different way, again, through the Bass Coast Community Emissions Summary. And it's quite telling when I think you see it like this as a bar chart. So this is really where we're working a lot with our regenerative farming and our food and waste, that we're looking to increase the amount of basically revegetation projects as one of the most direct ways to counteract some of these bars here, where obviously we're seeking efficiency and reduction of emissions. I'm not going to talk about too many of our other projects. I'm just going to focus very briefly in this short time frame on our current Neighbourhood Battery Initiative project. So we've just put out a participant information guide. Sorry, you can probably see my small child in the background misbehaving while I'm speaking. So basically we were successful in getting funding from the Victorian government as part of their Neighbourhood Battery Initiative. We actually were successful in having 2 projects funded. So this is one of the 2 that I'm speaking about here. So it's an innovative tariff trial, which will go for 12 months, starting in April next year. And it will involve 100 local participants on Phillip Island. I'm going to just segue slightly. The purpose of the tariff trial is actually to bring all of the parties together in a co-design process before the trial commences, to look at how we can set tariffs for the 12-month period and look at that system and see if it's actually successful in achieving an outcome that then hopefully could be rolled out in successive programs. So the tariff trial itself is using a big battery called Pisces that's coming to Phillip Island. It's not a community-owned battery. It is basically owned and operated by Mondo, who look at community energy and microgrid systems. And its predominant purpose is actually to help stabilise the grid and deal with some of the fluctuations in our tourist season population as well. But as part of that, they actually co-wrote the grant application with us. So they're very invested in looking at this co-design process, which is quite interesting. And it's also looking at almost like 3 different sectors. So a social sort of benefit sharing model, an environmental model, and a commercial model, and seeing what we can achieve out of it. So one of the main roles that Trippy has in this project is actually looking at how people from varied socio-economic circumstances can benefit from the shared renewable energy. And again, I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but it's quite interesting that I think part of the reason we were successful with a lot of our funding is that we had had a lot of community interaction and support for renewable energy and innovative projects. And one recent survey that we did actually came back with 95% of respondents saying yes or maybe to consider donating their excess solar to others in the community to increase social equity. So I think that's something we are very excited about investigating as part of the tariff trial and that co-design workshop as well. So I'm not going to say too much here. I just wanted to explain a little bit about the Neighbourhood Battery Initiative, in case anyone's not aware of that. So again, Victorian Government provided nearly $11 million in Neighbourhood Battery Initiative funding. So just under, well, I guess I should say closer to $3.5 million went out in grants to 16 projects across Victoria. And we were fortunate enough to get 2 of those on Phillip Island. So we're pretty excited, and we've got a lot of work to do when we're rolling up our sleeves to do it. And just on the right-hand side here, you can see, I guess, the main parties in this project. So we've got Totally Renewable Phillip Island, sort of more on the community engagement level to some degree. Energy Innovation Cooperative, who are the lead organisation for the project. We've got Mondo, who are bringing basically their commercial experience as well as a share of the battery in a virtual storage trial. And we are actually, speaking of retailers, we currently are about to release our expression of interest for an innovative retailer to take part in that 12-month trial. And I think it's really important, again, to just stress how much support we have from the Bass Coast Shire So they were involved in supporting our grant application, and they are very frequently present in our weekly sort of working group meetings, our project control group as well. And again, I'm going to just skip through all of this. This is some of the more detailed information. We had a group of guinea pigs come together who knew nothing about the tariff trial and basically got every question that you could think of about how it might run to produce an information guide for our local island community. And I think just in closing there, I'd just like to say it's a very complex thing to do to achieve this balance across every system, whether it's natural or man-made. But I think as we talk about renewing and regenerating, I think it's very important that we don't just focus on one sector. And I think that's why Trippy is particularly focused across those 6 groups, one of them being clean energy, because without looking at every element of how we interact as humans and what we draw out and use and how we use it and the lessons that we learn, we're just not going to make any real meaningful change. So I think it's very important we get cross-pollination and that we get true and meaningful change and a positive future ahead of that. So again, Trippy carbon neutral by 2030, also 100% renewable. We've got our fingers crossed, seeing how we go. And we see that as being through our collective community efforts to use clean, efficient energy, reduce pollution and inset emissions. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Oh, all right. Thank you very much, Zoe. That was a brilliant presentation. One question from Kristy about the tariff trial being only for 12 months.
Yeah, that's right. So I guess one of the guinea pig questions we got from our group is what happens at the end of the trial? And we would love to say it will continue if it's successful, but we do not know. And we know there have been some other trials quite different in format that weren't commercially viable. So they were sort of never followed through as an ongoing model. So we're hoping that this 12-month period will give us enough input. I think that co-design process is just critical, getting community to sit in the same room with Mondo and with the retailer to actually sit down and work out how the tariff structure will benefit people in sharing that renewable energy at a local level. Because it's something that, as we said to our guinea pig group, we're pulling that conversation out from like behind a boardroom door and bringing it right into community. So we don't know if it'll continue. We don't know if we'll be offered ongoing use of the neighbourhood battery if it is successful.
Sorry to interrupt. The grant that you've got pays for the battery, and then
no. So the battery is entirely separate infrastructure that is being provided to stabilise the grid on Phillip Island, but we were able to use a portion of it for virtual storage. So the grant only pays for the tariff trial, and the engagement of Mondo's services, community engagement, and the innovative retailer.
So is the network paying for the battery installation?
Well, AusNet put out the application for the battery to be taken up, and Mondo put in a bid, so they were successful. So they won I think it's a lease of, I can't remember how many years, but basically they will own and operate it for quite a number of years. So it's effectively their asset to use. But we were very fortunate that they went into this grant application with us. So that's why I said at the beginning, it's not a community battery. It's not owned by community, but we're doing innovative trials in how we can look at community benefit sharing by using, it's almost like virtual accounting, a virtual component of this big battery. So what it frees up.
It'll be a really worthwhile project to figure out how you can make that work and what sort of conditions would be appropriate to continue that sort of arrangement, I suppose.
Yeah, we're hopeful. We don't know where it will go, but we're hopeful.
Well, those are the best kinds of projects.
Yeah,
go with open eyes and you figure it out together.
That's right.
Okay, fantastic. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll let other people ask them. I'll ask theirs first. Has anyone got questions at the moment for Zoe? There's a lot of information there, and I know that certainly members of the My Town CRG have, because we're not obviously linked to the network, there's always questions around, what would we do if we were, having a relationship like Trippy does with Mondo? How would that change things for us? What would it allow us to do? So has anyone got any questions here for Zoe? I've got a hand up. Everyone's gone very quiet.
Can I just make one other tiny
I
point?
have.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
I was just going to say, sorry, Rosemary, one minor thing, and only because I won't call you out, Laura, but I will. We've got Laura Bulmer on the line as well, who is actually from Tenby Point. So part of Trippy's initial seed funding was to also engage with our Wardline community, which is obviously at great risk in climate change. So trying to activate more small communities to look at things like what Trippy's doing. And we're super excited that Tenby Point has just leapfrogged ahead and has got probably 90% of the way to being a totally renewable Tenby. So I'd just like to commend Laura for all her efforts. And we've got about another 6 or 7 communities reaching out to us, wanting to know exactly this question. How do we start? How do we build community energy? So it's quite interesting.
Thank you for that. Rosemary, you've got a question?
Yeah, I've got a couple actually. First of all, Zoe, with this community battery and working with Mondo, now are you looking at also installing extra community batteries on the island? What is the output of the community battery or the storing capacity, so that we've got an idea? And also with your working groups, how did you organise them? So, the working groups you have, I'm taking it they're from Trippy's sort of interest group, or like we're volunteers here. How did you organise them? So that's 2 questions. Sorry.
No, that's fine. And I'll answer them in reverse order.
Okay.
So basically, after the public meeting in 2018 that everyone decided to start up Totally Renewable Phillip Island, there was a series of 3 workshops. And so basically people who were interested in being involved, and it was a significant proportion of who had attended that initial meeting, they basically came together and mapped out how we would proceed, how it could be separated and what needed to be looked at and covered. So that was before my time. I wasn't present in those meetings, so I can't give you the nitty gritty. But I think it was identified down to a local context of what we are as a regional centre, a waterside town, also agriculture, also tourist economy. We get a massive amount of visitors that leads to traffic jams of up to an hour trying to cross the bridge onto Phillip Island. So I can just see my monkey climbing behind me. A bit of entertainment. So I don't know if that helps, Rosemary, but that's sort of, I guess it came out of a lot of intensive community discussion to work out what were the core areas that we needed to focus on.
And then did you call from volunteers from that group to form part of each working party? Or and they obviously, were they dependent on the skills that they already had, or were there many, or some of them were anyway? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so to some degree, basically Totally Renewable Phillip Island is all volunteers. I'm the only person who is paid in a part-time coordinator role. So it's basically all volunteer effort. So it is about as grassroots as you can get. So I think we've got quite a strong and engaged community down here. A lot of people are very passionate about environmental issues, climate change as well. We're an island, so it's incredibly critical that we are aware of how we manage. So I think there's that side of it. There's also the side of we have a lot of people who have lived in Melbourne and worked in Melbourne coming to live down here, you know, later in their working careers. So we have a lot of skills. We have a lot of expertise in our fairly small community. I think we're up to about 12,000 on the island now, something like that, 10 to 12. So it is sort of a fit of who is most interested in what. And we have then each of those 6 working groups has a head, and each person who is a head of one of those working groups automatically goes into our Trippy core group. So we have about 8 to 10 people on our core group, and we have monthly meetings. We also have 2 monthly partner meetings with all of our 15 partner groups, so that everybody is able to communicate at that broader level as well.
Okay, thanks. And the battery.
The battery, yes. So this is where terminology gets difficult. I shy away from calling the big battery a community battery, because a lot of people presume that means it is community owned, which it is not. So the state government like to call it a neighbourhood battery. We're just calling it the big battery.
Okay.
The big battery, or Pisces.
Yeah.
So that is basically our Stream 2 project through the NBI, the Neighbourhood Battery Initiative funding. We also have a Stream 1 project, which I won't talk about in great detail, apart from it is a feasibility report, feasibility study, looking at 10 smaller batteries at neighbourhood level across the island. Yeah, so it's quite tricky because they're both battery projects, but they're quite different in focus. So I don't want to
say too much,
get too confused.
No,
but
it's just interesting that you're looking at neighbourhood batteries as well, smaller neighbourhood batteries, because I'm sure we'd be quite interested in looking at something like that too. Yeah.
So the big battery, it's a 5 megawatt battery.
Okay.
So it's a couple of shipping containers. It's on the high voltage line, central on the island. The 10 neighbourhood batteries we're looking at are on the low voltage lines. So each one of those, we're actually very close to our final report that we'll submit to DELP. That's coming out, I think, the 19th of August to DELP.
Okay.
So it will be published shortly after that. And yeah, so it's basically, we've done a lot of assessment in working out which substations were either overloaded, or we had a whole lot of parameters to narrow down 10 locations on the island that we wanted to study for different setups and scenarios. And it also looks at the scenario of size requirement and cost, and also some of them, if they're a bit larger, have to be ground mounted rather than pole mounted. And therefore that triggers a whole lot of other requirements in terms of clearance for fire safety, amenity planning, and people in the neighbourhood potentially not liking the idea of seeing a battery. Okay. So that's sort of what we're covering to some degree in that feasibility study.
Okay, thanks for that. That's
not at all.
Good information for us. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm happy to
and we'd be interested to do a follow-up as well, especially on the results of the neighbourhood batteries.
More than happy to.
Yeah. Be great. Thank you.
Thanks for your questions, Rosemary. Has anybody got anything else they'd like to ask Zoe at the moment, or any of our other speakers who are still obviously on the call and more than happy to answer your questions? Anything else you'd like to say? No? Okay. I actually had another question for Zoe, and that was really around the analysis around the locations on the island. Who is that being done by? Is that all being done by Mondo?
Yeah, so both of our NBI projects are the same partnership groups,
Yeah,
Energy
okay.
Innovation, Mondo, Trippy. So Mondo is providing the technical expertise.
Yep.
Trippy is basically providing community engagement, and Energy Innovation Co-op is the lead organisation. They're also our auspice body. But altogether, we have weekly working meetings. So we're working very cohesively as a team. And I think it's that balance of not just working alone and coming up with a commercial model, a social model. You know, it's actually coming together and making sure that where we're getting to considers all of those factors at once. Because I think we're all aware of what happens if it's just left to a commercial mentality, that it doesn't always suit community or the future direction that we could see. Well, that's my belief anyway.
Absolutely, no, I don't disagree with you at all. Okay, I did have something else to. If anybody has anything else they want to ask at the moment, or any of the comments they want to make, please do chip in, because I've made quite a few notes and I can't find my question now. So go ahead. What's gone? Where has it gone? I did have one in terms of how you manage the communication. You've tested your Q&A and your comms with your guinea pig group. Is there much in the way of pushback from the local community at all? I mean, we present what is a really, really positive outlook and positive feeling around community energy, but we do know, especially obviously in our area, Darren, you may be familiar with this, I don't know, but obviously there's a lot of people that earn a lot of money by working either in the valley or offshore out of Longford, and there's a real, I don't know how I'm going to put it, it's not so much an identity crisis, but it's quite a change for some people, not just to sort of imagine that, their power needs will be met by renewable energy, but it's a real change in thinking around how they might, how they're going to survive, how their livelihoods and lifestyles are going to be met. Do you ever get any of that kind of pushback from anybody else, on the island that's not 100% engaged with what you're doing?
I think we've been absolutely blown away by how much we're supported by community, and it can be, I mean, we don't do extensive, expensive marketing or have people out doing phone call surveys, but we see all the Facebook channels on the island where people are, often slamming all sorts of things, but there's very little in the way of slamming the idea of community energy. And if anything, the one thing we get grief on is, why isn't it a community-owned battery?
Yeah, okay.
That seems to be the thing people are really pushing for. And unfortunately, we then have to say it comes with a multi-million-dollar price tag, that is beyond our capability at Trippy with one part-time coordinator to actually pull off. So it requires a very extensive network, I guess. And it's really a whole nother story. But would love to see, I think people are seeing this as a stepping stone, as a potential way to then embark on many more projects. And I'm particularly interested in a lot of our smaller communities around Phillip Island who would not have need for a big battery, but could look at smaller community batteries. So I'm really interested to see a network of these small townships providing and supporting each other, and potentially even sharing energy amongst each other. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, the potential's certainly there, and the appetite is as well. I mean, I'd say in my own experience here, we've had very, very little negative feeling shown towards us. I mean, there are some people that are just going, oh well, we're going to need candles, and I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah. Can I jump in there?
Of course,
especially on that point. There are obviously in the Gippsland region lots of people who are really involved in, I like to say, the previous energy generation, whether that be through coal-fired power stations or coal mines or gas or whatever it might be. And you know, we need to be really thankful that they did all of that work in sometimes really dangerous conditions so that we can power ourselves today. I think the sort of way forward is the way that I see it is we're not saying that those things should shut down straight away. It's about getting everybody in the community ready to make the transition at some point in the future. And you know, part of that is having lots of options available. So community energy is one pathway, having large scale renewables is another, whether that's offshore wind or onshore solar farms or wind turbines or whatever it might be. But I think the opportunity here is that we need to have a diversity of solutions, and that's how we're going to be resilient, and to have a planned pathway to a clean energy future. And one organisation that might be relevant to look up is the Next Economy. So it's a Brisbane-based group, but they do work in coal communities. So they've done a lot of work with the Latrobe Valley, with the Hunter, and with Gladstone. And they've actually done a lot of research into what are these communities who are currently based on coal infrastructure, and that's how they get a lot of their revenue. What are they looking for in the future, and how can we support them to go towards a low carbon future that's going to be, you know, healthier and sustainable for everyone.
Could I just add to that, because I think that's a fantastic point. So I know before I was involved with Trippy, I was briefly involved with a group from the Latrobe Valley called Communities Leading Change. So I think it's just critical to also acknowledge that we haven't just come in cold to this environment. There's been all these groups looking at that transition. Latrobe Valley Authority's been instrumental in leading so much change, and I think Communities Leading Change, I believe, may have come out of one of their endeavours as well. So I think that's why I see it broader than just one topic, such as community energy. I think it takes all aspects of community working at all different levels to sort of redirect our path into something we can, you know, move forward together in. That's, sorry, my little interlude.
No, I agree.
No, there's certainly been a couple of our CRG members who were involved in the publication that came out of Communities Leading Change. So you're completely right. So I mean, it's not none of what we're doing is isolated. It's building on a foundation of change that is already there. I did have one question in terms of, and I may have missed it, in your working groups, is there anything that Trippy does in relation to energy efficiency, specifically, other than just obviously trying to ensure that people's homes and businesses are more energy efficient?
Yeah, good question. So we have that falls sort of under the remit of the clean energy group to some degree. But again, it's that strange grey zone where each of those working groups actually comes together every month. So we're all involved in each group and the discussions around what each group's doing. So we understand efficiency is just critical, because I was a bit blown away. I watched a Four Corners report on the new green mining movement that horrified me, because they were basically saying we need to open more mines to get all the minerals to make more batteries so we can be green. And I thought, well, maybe we need to shift our patterns of behaviour first. So we need less, you know, so we don't just keep up with our current expectation of what is acceptable. I think we need to understand efficiency and behaviour change before we just bring in more resources. So we are working on that, but I think coming through, I mean, Trippy's been around for 3 years, coming through 2 years of COVID as a volunteer-based group. So we've had to sort of be very careful about what we focus on. And I think we were quite surprised when we actually were successful with these 2 grants. So it's almost taken our focus to manage these. So we've a few other things. Initially, we're going to focus very significantly on energy efficiency, but it's had to just sort of shift sideways for a little while we run these ones through.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is critical, I think. It's absolutely critical.
Yeah, the winter that we're having has thrown it all into stark light in terms of how energy efficient so many of our buildings are.
Well, that's right. I actually did a talk for the Sustainability Festival in Bass last year on passive house as a concept.
Yeah.
And part of that was I was looking up the CSIRO data on Australian houses, and we have an average of 15 air cycles per hour. That's how drafty they are, that the air goes out 15 times in an hour. So you're basically heating all the volume of your house every 4 minutes, you know, which is crazy. And I was speaking about passive house in that the standard to achieve passive house is 0.6 air changes per hour, so less than 1. So if you think of, I had that bar chart up earlier of stationary energy use, and that's one of our highest carbon emissions. It is a direct impact of inefficiency in our built environment, as well as other things.
Mm.
That's my architect hat. I'm taking that off now.
No, I mean, I also do some financial literacy education as well, and one of the key things that you talk about in terms of, you know, trying to reduce people's cost of living is simply just try and draft proof their homes, and it's really difficult if you don't own your home and you're on low income and you still own your home. It's really difficult. So it's certainly something that a lot of Australians are having to deal with, and it's that economic inclusion in both renewable energy is something that is discussed a lot at our community reference group meetings. So anyway.
I think the good news, and this perhaps again leads into that conversation that we're all having to do it together. So when I was more architect and less trippy, I was part of the Architects Declare movement. So Architects Declare a climate and biodiversity emergency. We also had, you know, the medical profession declared. I was running think tanks with Builders Declare, Planners Declare, Architects Declare. So it's this whole shifting infrastructure of each group independently making change. And I think that richness and the critical dialogue when we then come together and see it's not just clean energy, it's not just, you know, Phillip Island, it's actually everywhere all at once. So there's a huge power in keeping that discussion going and that connection in discussion between groups and sectors and regions. I think we're just going to see a whole new world in probably the next 3 to 5 years even.
Yeah, okay. All right. Are there any more questions from the board, from anyone? Darren, you've remained very quiet. You know, the last 20 minutes, I can see you smiling. Have you got anything else you'd like to add there or comment on?
No, when you're in the room with 3 very intelligent people, it's best to keep your mouth shut, is what I believe. So I shall continue to do so.
Thank you, Darren. Fantastic. All right. Okay. We might draw it to a close there. I'd like to thank the 3 of you for taking the time to talk to us and present to us this evening. I certainly have learned a lot. The comments from and the questions from other people. I know that our CRG members who are online would have certainly learnt a huge amount. And I also, as you were talking, Zoe, you were talking about your Trippy group being all voluntary. I mean, so much of community energy is based on a huge amount of voluntary labour. And, you know, well, I mean, obviously I am paid as community liaison officer on the My Town feasibility study, but our CRG members, they turn up to meetings regularly, they come along, they think, they read, they comment, they're happy for me to take their photograph and stick it on all sorts of different, you know, publications or online and everything. And they don't complain about it. They still rock up fresh with more ideas the next time. So it's really important to acknowledge that people get involved. And I just wanted to pass over quickly to Julie Breyer, who a lot of you will know she's the lead here on the My Town, project lead at the Resource Centre in Hayfield of My Town, and obviously she's a regular on our community reference group as well. And Julie, I'm going to unblur you, see if I can unblur you. It's always difficult. My background. Oh, sorry, I don't need to see my office look. But anyway, Julie has been sat here, and she's got a quick call to action for those of you listening. Sorry.
Welcome everyone, and it's been interesting tonight. The communities, I feel, are the ones who have been fighting this cause for many, many years, and that I think is why things are becoming, bigger and bigger and more successful. And our group has, as Em said, has been fantastic. And there have been people who have come forward over our project, prior to the project, before our funding, they'd come in and say how are you going, if they, they knew what was going on. And we're more than happy to have new members come along. We've had a couple come along that weren't on the original group. I'm very happy to say that they've all stayed and stuck to it, and as Em says, turned up at our meetings. But it's something that we need to keep on working on and pushing for, and Hayfield's been doing it for a long time, so as everyone knows. And when you talk about efficiency, flag programs 11, 12 years ago, we did that and won our award for. So it's proving important that communities keep on staying together. Thank you.
Sustainable groups and sustainability. That's really what it's about. That is sure we achieve change. Okay, I am going to finish up there. We're 5 minutes ahead of schedule, but I think it's a good time to draw it to a close. Thank you again to everybody for attending this evening. This webinar will be, it's being recorded. It will be available via Facebook, Instagram, and our website as well, along with the slides that were presented. Again, thank you very much to our presenters, Zoe, Kristy, and Darren. And I know that you're all very busy, so thanks very much for giving your time this evening. There'll be another My Town newsletter coming out very shortly, and I wish you all a very good evening. Thanks a lot now. Bye.
Thank you.